Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining our Tech Talk. Me and Eddie are going to be talking about the experience that we most recently had with incorporating accessibility into our mobile apps. So first, I want to just give a little bit of a brief background on accessibility in general. Accessibility basically can be broken out into 4 different domains. And I'll talk about each of these individually a little bit in a second. But vision, hearing, physical and motor skills, and learning and literacy. And I'm trying to get to the next slide. All right, so what we wanted to do here was first give, there's a lot of tools that are available on your mobile devices for each of these domains to help with those specifically. The first one that I want to give, I'm going to show a brief video here that's about 45 seconds, but a little bit of background. So vision in general, vision impairments include blindness, color blindness, all forms of vision loss, and challenges in situations that make seeing the screen uncomfortable or difficult. VoiceOver is probably the most widely used tool to address vision. It's a screen reader that interacts with objects in your app so users can drive the interface even if they can't see it. So the video that I'm going to show right now, this is actually Eddie went through on his actual iPhone and enabled the VoiceOver feature in his phone, and then quickly we're showing it reading the first screen in this small app that we created. So let me play this for you. So he's going into the settings, into accessibility, and here's the VoiceOver toggle.
VoiceOver on. Home. Files. Genudo do. Genudo do. To-do list. Heading. Add. Button. Pause it. Tasks for today. Wash dishes. The sink is getting too full. Do laundry. Don't forget the kids' clothes. Add. Button. Possibly. Add. To-do list. Back button. To-do list. Head. Screen recording in progress.
All right. So you see a little bit of a glimpse there. It went through all the elements on the app for you. The next domain that I want to quickly mention was about hearing. So in addition to all types of hearing loss, hearing impairments include situations in which people don't want their devices to make noise, which could even include when they're in a movie theater. So your phone could give you the ability to connect to Bluetooth hearing aids or devices, showing closed captions when you are watching, a video or a TV show, podcast. And then I know we probably don't think about it too much, but just being able to have alerts be visible and vibrate on your mobile device also addresses this domain. So the next domain is physical and motor skills. So people with physical and motor challenges can have difficulty holding or manipulating their device. One thing to address this is the fact that you can use dictation. So that little microphone on your keyboard that allows you to tap it, and you speak what you want to type, and it handles that for you. So pretty much just in general, allowing people to control their apps and devices using their voices. There's even something like video chats with FaceTime and stuff, right? Allowing people to make gestures easier, to perform, and having chats with other people. Assistance also to create shortcuts made available from the phone's home screen is another option here. And then the last domain is ultimately learning and literacy. These challenges include difficulty speaking and reading, managing complexity, and staying focused. This domain is actually broken out primarily in iOS. Android, it doesn't really seem to be considered a separate category, but on your phone in the accessibility settings, there are, this is actually a specific section where they provide you the Safari reader, for instance. I know a lot of people might not be familiar with the Safari reader, but it is something to, navigate the web and just reduce the visual clutter. There's also something called guided access, which helps people with autism or other attention and sensory challenges stay focused on the task at hand. And there's also typing feedback. So each letter you type on the keyboard is spoken aloud. So why is accessibility really important for mobile apps? I mean, when you develop a mobile app, you really want to show people that you want everyone to be able to use your app, whether they have a disability or not. Some interesting facts and statistics that Eddie and I found, which we didn't even actually realize before, was approximately 1 in 7 people worldwide have some sort of disability or impairment that affects the way they interact with the world and their mobile devices. And there has been a 600% increase in mobile screen reader usage in just over 3 years. We got that statistic from a group called Web Accessibility in Mind, abbreviated WebAIM. And also, according to that same group, there's a higher percentage of people that use a screen reader on a mobile device as opposed to their laptop or desktop. We found that actually about 86% of people use a screen reader on their mobile devices. Whoops, I just skipped to back. So what tools are available for mobile apps? There's a lot of tools out there. The ones that Eddie and I actually were using on a previous project for our iOS app with the development environment Xcode, it comes actually built in with Accessibility Inspector. And we'll be going over that during this talk. For Android, there's also different types of tools. The one in particular we used was not built into the Android Studio development environment, but it's a tool called Application Insights, and it's developed by Microsoft and actually available for other platforms other than Android. But it is a free tool, and it was something that our client was actually interested in us using. There's other tools that are out there, just throwing out a few more things. On Android also, there's a pre-launch report that's on Google Play. So if you distribute your app on Google Play, you have access to this report. And they run accessibility tests using this accessibility test framework. And the results of these tests appear in a table on the accessibility tab of your app's pre-launch report. Also on your iOS and Android devices, I just wanted to show a quick screenshot here. So if you actually look on your phone and go in the settings, you should be able to see there's a section for accessibility on your iPhone, as we've shown on the left, and for Android on the right. Again, Android, it might vary depending on what download services you actually have on your phone. But yeah, there's a lot of features that you can enable and play around with, different apps and see what's available. So now I'm going to actually kick it over to Eddie. We created a small demo app here specifically for the sake of showing some simple accessibility that we actually ran into in a real project. And he will go ahead and walk through the tool, including the tool that we ran against to see what accessibility errors occurred. So I will go ahead and, Eddie, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, it says that I cannot share my screen while you have yours.
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Nice. Okay, so I'm gonna start the demo with showing you what we built. So let's see if this loads. So basically what we wanted to cover was probably like the most common UI elements that you will find in most mobile applications, right? And this includes, in this case, a table view or a set of data that you display in a table, labels and buttons, also images. So this application is very simple. It doesn't really have more business logic other than seeing what the UI looks like, because we actually wanted to focus most of the work on accessibility. So now that we have the little app just displayed here, I want to introduce to you the actual tool that is probably the main star of the whole accessibility work. So Xcode comes with this accessibility inspector that is built in the IDE. And to access that, well, you have to open Xcode, and here you can find the in the upper top left corner, I'm hoping I said it right, you will find the Xcode keyword, and then you go to Open Developer Tool, and then you click on Accessibility Inspector, and here you go. So I'm gonna stop a little bit here in the Accessibility Inspector to just give you a little overview of what this tool is. So this tool is really cool because it basically gives you access to most of the apps that you have in your Apple devices. So you can see here that it's like checking for processes in my computer. You can also use that in a physical device or in an iPhone. Or in this case, we're gonna focus on the simulator, which is where our application is running. So in here, now we have another little thing like, well, it says a stop inspection follows point or the follow point. And that basically means that you can tap anywhere in the screen in your app, and that follow point will highlight that element, and it will tell you some details regarding that UI element. In this case, it will say, hey, so this is a label and it has text, it has a static text, traits. The accessibility traits are actually some things that will help the accessibility tools that are built in with iOS to like recognize if you are talking about text or an image or something that you can interact with. If this was a button, we can actually perform an action on that button, or we can hit play and see how the voiceover will behave with this label. So I don't know if you were able to hear that. Maybe not, but basically what it did is what we saw in the video previously, where it was just reading out loud what the text was. So besides that, we also have this other option, or this like settings option. And this is like a very important part that we're gonna be working with. And here we have like a very quick access to some of the most common accessibility options that we will see in iOS. In this case, we're just gonna focus on the font size or on the font resizing. So as you can see, I can actually move the slider and nothing will happen in my app because my fonts are not resizable. So if I go back to this little like warning icon that says audit, I can actually run an audit. And this is what we did for our application. We can run an audit and it will tell you what is compliant, well, what is not compliant with accessibility. So after I run audit, it basically just took a screenshot of the things that are not accessibility compliant in the app. And as you can see, this is a very simple UI, but we actually have 12 warnings. So you can imagine with more complexity in the UI, there were a lot of warnings happening at some point. Here you can see, I'm just gonna pick this dynamic text font sizes are unsupported. And I'm just gonna try to go into more details on what this looks like. So if you click on this little arrow here, it will give you a little bit of a description on what the warning is. But another cool thing is that you have this little eye here that if you click on it, since it took a screenshot, it will highlight where that UI element is located and what that basically is. And also sometimes it will give you a suggestion that is like a very descriptive suggestion on how to like address this warning. In this case, it says that I have to set some Boolean to on, but that's not entirely the truth on how to make this work. So now that we have all these 12 beautiful warnings, I'm just gonna go ahead and try to fix fix them all. But we're gonna start in order. We're gonna go with the text fields, or well, the text labels first. And to do that, I actually have these cell just to give you a little description of what's going on here. So we have we have our main view built right here. This view has this like header or this text that is just, it does nothing other than showing text. We don't even interact with it. And then we have our table. And within our table, we have the actual content that we populate with data. And that content, well, it just has a title, a description, and a little pencil, just an image that we can, work with. So to actually work with this table, we have this little class that configures what the UI looks like. So to do this, I'm gonna start with the title label. And basically what we want to do to support like resizable font sizes or font text, I don't know if I'm saying it right. We want to create a resizable font, which is like a built-in object that comes with iOS. So I'm just gonna create that, and I'm just gonna call it resizable font. We have this thing called UI font metrics, which is that object that kind of generates that resizable font. If we use default, so basically we're saying that we are using a font type or font style of body. So within iOS, we have these like text styles that are like title, subtitle, body, and I think we have captions and so on. There are like 12 or more styles, but the default one is body. And once we do that, we are actually gonna use this function, or gonna call this function called scale font. Scale font is just, as the function says, it's gonna take in a font and it's gonna return a scalable font. So to make things easier, we're gonna take the font that has been already created with this label that comes by default when we are just dragging and dropping the label inside our storyboard. So if we do that, now what we want to do, we want to assign that font to our title label. So if we do this, this is just part of the solution. We still have to enable that Boolean that the accessibility inspector told us. And that Boolean basically enables this text or this UI label to be resizable within or to listen for resizing changes whenever the user like changes the text or the font size on their phone. So that Boolean is just called adjust font for content size category. When we set this to true, we have a resizable font for our title. So if all this run correctly, we will see 2 warnings less, which corresponds to the wash dishes and do laundry text. So I'm just running the inspector, and as you can see, we have here a little indicator that says we went down to 10 warnings. And that's cool. But the problem is that we have to do this process for basically everything, like all text. And at least in the project that we were working on, it presented a challenge because there are some texts that we don't even have to interact with. We just want to see the text. And if we want to make this font resizable, we will have to connect that text to our code and add these lines of code to each label. So what we came up with is with this little custom class or UI wrapper, however you want to call it. So basically this guy, what it does is that it extends the default UI label, and then whenever that is initialized in the storyboard or in the view, it applies that scalable font, and it just does all the logic for us. So basically what we will have to do in the end is just replace or set up a custom class in any of the labels that we have in our app. So I'm just gonna go here and select this task for today label that we don't have to click on it or do anything. And I'm just gonna assign our accessibility UI label custom class here. And just by doing that, when we create that label, it will automatically assign a resizable font. And we will do the same thing with our title label and with our description label. But just to keep things consistent, we will also do, or we will also assign or rename this UI label here in our custom cell to be the same custom class that we have just provided in our view builder or the storyboard. So once we do this, we have all the text in our view, in our current view, to be resizable and therefore accessibility compliant. And I can actually just remove these 2 lines of code that we added because that has been already applied by that custom class. So to confirm that, I'm just gonna rerun the app and let me see, run the accessibility inspector again. Cool, so now we have 9 warnings. But most of the warnings or all the warnings are not related to text, or at least to the text that we have been working with. Now, we can confirm that our text is already resizable and it's accessibility compliant if we go into this little like settings button, and now we can change the font size. And as we move this slider, we can see that the text just changes the size. Now, as you can see, the UI breaks, but that is something that I might touch on later. But the basic idea that now our text just obeys what the setting or the font size setting from iOS works, it's fine. So now we still have one more warning showing up here related to text, or at least it says, hey, dynamic text font sizes are partially unsupported. And if we want to see more information about it, something really interesting happens. It took a screenshot, supposedly, but then it took a screenshot of an empty thing, like an empty space. And at least in the project that we were working on, we would spend probably more than a day trying to figure why this was happening. Because in any other spots, these accessibility labels text will just work just fine. And in the end, I'm gonna show you what the fix for this is. And this is kind of funny because the inspector doesn't tell you that. So let me go back to my main view where I have defined the cell. And in here, as you can see, we have our title label, and the title label has a font with a size of 14 points. And that is totally fine. There is no a warning happening there. But if I go to the description label, I can see that my font size is still a custom font and is of 10 points. And this is really important because just by changing this to 12, now the accessibility inspector should not mark that as an error anymore. Which is interesting because in all the things that we search for, it never said that the minimum text size had to be at least 12. So as you can see, we got rid of those warnings. And now we can like fully say that our UI labels or text is accessibility compliant, right? I don't know if you guys have any questions so far or any comments. I actually think this font size or this like minimum size for the text should at least be more descriptive in the errors. But I don't know if you have any questions or should we continue? Cool. Okay, so the next thing we want to fix is this other little warning that says hit area is too small. So if we go into more detail on this warning, This warning actually gives us more information, or more useful information to work with, because it says, hey, you have a button that is too small for the user to interact, and the current size is 41 pixels or 41 points by 44 points. And the guidelines actually specify that the minimum width and height should be at least 44 points. So to fix that, one might think that we will just go onto our button and change the width and height. In this case, the size that we are gonna actually change will be the width. But here's something interesting happens. Let me show you. So we are actually using this little iOS element called UI bar button item that we assign in our toolbar, so that you can see the plus button here. And as you can see here, we are actually providing like a system defined value. We are not even creating or adding a custom image. And this is something important that I wanna point out. So I'm just gonna extract that button so that we can modify the width. And now that I extracted the button, we can actually set the width to be 44 points. So if I say add button, and then I run the app with my custom width, one might think that this will be enough for this accessibility warning to disappear. And sadly, it's not the case. So the thing is that for some reason, the width with this iOS built-in element cannot be changed, or at least it doesn't really listen to us. So the workaround, or at least the workaround that we use in the app that we work on, is to actually create a custom button or a custom image or image for our button. So I'm just gonna do that. I already have this little image, this add icon image here. So basically we just wanna create an image. I think it was named add icon, yeah. Okay. So now what we want to do is we still want to create this UI bar button item, but instead of selecting a system element that iOS provides us, we actually just want to provide an image, which is the one that we just created here. The style that we want to utilize here will be plain. The target, we're just gonna keep the same target and action that we have already defined in our previous bar bottom item, so that it does the same action. But now by just doing this, adding this custom image, that warning should be gone. Because now we are able, oh, and that's really small, but we can actually resize that. But as you can see, that warning should be gone. Because now we were able to change the width of our bar bottom item. And this, so basically this this is something that we just found in our sample project that didn't happen in the other project that we were working on, because we were already doing something custom. So I think it was a good finding. The next thing that we are gonna change, and this is the last thing, is this small pencil image. So most of the time, or well, not most of the time, but sometimes you will have these little images that are just decorations that not necessarily represent a button or something to tap on. And at least in this app, that is the case. Like, we don't really want the user to tap on the little pencil because it's just really small. And if we wanted the user to interact with that, we will prefer to use a UI bottom image, because there is already like a or UI button with an image, because there is already like a standard to do that. So in this case, for some reason, the accessibility inspector is taking this little image as an element that can be interacted with and that can be probably tapped, or it actually says that it might be text. So the way to fix this is to go one more time back to our storyboard. And in here, we go inside the cell, and then I tap on the pencil. And here, I'd like to take a little bit of time to show this part to all of you. So here in the pencil, or when I selected the pencil, now we have access to a lot of properties that are just for this UI image. And one of the properties, or one of the little tabs that we have access here, is this identity inspector. So as you can see here, all the way to the bottom, we have this accessibility like segment. With this accessibility segment, we can define the accessibility traits, which I think I mentioned this briefly before. The traits basically means that the built-in tools for iOS will know if this is a button, or if this is an image, a search field, or whatever it can do. It will just help any tool that is like doing the voiceover do their job better. So in this case, we can actually modify the traits that we have available. And what we want to do is we want to disable this user interaction enable, because we don't want the user to tap on it. And the next thing that we want to do is we actually want to describe what this is. Because whenever we run the voiceover, or whenever we run the voiceover, at that point, then the system will actually read that description. And then the user will know that it is a button, or it is not, it is an image, and that has a name. So to finalize that process, we just have to click on enable accessibility, and then we have to give it a name. In this case, just to keep things simple, I'm just gonna say pencil, but it should be a descriptive name so that the voiceover does its job. So the next thing that I wanna do is run the app, and just by doing those changes in the pencil image, I should be able to see all my warnings gone from the accessibility inspector. And as you can see, once you get this no warnings screen, then you're good to move on to the next screen. Yeah, so that is pretty much what we wanted to cover for the iOS Live demo. It is a little bit more like extra work than what we had to do in Android. And I don't know if Erica wants to talk a little bit about that, because we'd like to show you how Android handled that at the
Yeah,
same time.
thanks, Eddie. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so really quickly, hopefully everyone can see my screen again. So yeah, just a quick recap again of the iOS stuff. So the warnings that we found and how we fix them, the dynamic text font size, we saw that all over. We definitely recommend making a reusable component like the custom wrapper class that Eddie showed. Your minimum font size is going to be greater than or equal to 12. Another warning being the hit area too small. You'll get that on really any buttons or wherever it thinks there's going to be interactable, tappable elements. It was just so crazy to us that an element that they would give you for free using Xcode, like such as the UI bar button item, was something that just didn't come available with accessibility like correct, and it would throw warnings. So make sure your height and width are definitely greater than or equal to 44. Then the last warning, like we went over, again, you'll see some of these warnings that they're just not easy to navigate around and fix. You know, sometimes the accessibility inspector will say one thing when really they're not providing a helpful guidance, and you kind of just need to try and fix a bunch of other stuff, you know, to make it work. Such as when Eddie showed the one thing where, you know, it was showing space, you know, and we somehow stumbled upon, oh, maybe we should try seeing if we can increase the font size. You know, we will see some things with different colors, right? Like make sure your color contrast passes. And you want to make sure also that that section in Interface Builder where you have the accessibility options, the checkboxes defining and describing the different views and what that element actually is. Just making sure it's as it matches what your expectations are for what you want to show to the user. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about Android. I did though want to say that at least from our experience, Android does come, it seems, built in with, you know, a lot of easy ways to navigate around accessibility. It will show you easily warnings in the development environment for the most part, if not always, for things that you know will be accessibility issues. Like it tells you right up front. But like I said, one of the tools that we can use to see accessibility issues in Android is Accessibility Insights. And you can go to this website, accessibilityinsights.io. It is developed by Microsoft, and it's also available for Android, web, and Windows. I can't really say why it wasn't developed for iOS. And that's actually the reason we ended up using the Xcode Accessibility Inspector for our iOS app. So we may see, you know, different results depending on what accessibility tools you ultimately end up, you know, using. This is the screenshot of, so on the right, it was the Android app that we built was exactly the same as what we just saw for iOS. And this is just a screenshot of the Accessibility Insights tool, what it could ultimately look like for you. So you have, it takes a snapshot of your app, again, just like iOS, view by view. But you can see that it will, for this particular instance, it complained because the two pencil icons that were on each row in our list didn't have a sufficient target size. So similar to Android as iOS, you need a minimum width and minimum height for things such as an image button, if they are actually going to be tappable and interactable. Also, you definitely need to make sure that you have a content description or hint or label for any kind of screen readers that will be going through each of the elements in your view. You really want to make sure that, you know, thinking that any and everyone could be using a screen reader or a voiceover tool for your app, and you want to make sure that it reads to the person every single element that is going to be on your view. Otherwise, it really does make it not, you know, usable, not user friendly, I guess, for people that have are wanting to use those tools. And with that said, I think we are pretty much done. We are opening the floor to any questions people have.
That was really cool. Thanks for putting that all together. And I just want to say that it was so funny that Apple's provided UI bar button item gives an accessibility warning.
Yes.
That you have to build a custom one to replace their system one. Nice work on everything.
Yeah, thanks. And again, like you'll probably see that. I mean, that was, again, we made a super simplified app. You know, you probably will notice that with other elements, you know, too. But one of the things that we did come across a lot with our app was we actually had a lot of custom views. And so again, when you're doing custom, it gets a little more tricky with how you're even going to make sure that those are, you know, accessible.
One thing that I like to add, that this might even be a question, but so basically what we did is build an app really quick that just comes with the like things that are out of the box from iOS. And one might think, why these default elements like labels are not compliant with accessibility or are not like resizable by default. So after doing a little bit of reading, and I haven't confirmed this yet, but apparently Swift UI does cover this a bit more than this like classic approach. And ultimately what happens, or the way that iOS gets this done by default without creating like any custom wrapper, and I can show you really quick, is by just utilizing those text, let me see how I can show it, those like text styles that come built in the UI kit library. So to demonstrate that, I want to add just a label here, just really simple. I'm just gonna say, I am a label or something. So if I run this app, it will once again trigger another accessibility warning saying, hey, this thing might not be accessibility compliant. And it will just correspond to our label. As you can see, it says that it has a warning. So the way to fix this without like going on to the extra thing of creating a wrapper is to go to font in your attributes inspector. And here, instead of utilizing the system font, you can customize this and you can select custom, but what's gonna make it work is one of these text styles that are in this dropdown. So once you select body, it will basically utilize some UI element that iOS has already, or that Apple has already created. And now you have to check here on the dynamic type. And by doing those two things, it will just make your UI label resizable and accessible. Well, that is not, that doesn't look good, but you can see that the warning is gone. So that is like a more straightforward way of doing things. But the downside is that most of the time we're gonna be developing our apps with custom fonts. So it won't fit all the scenarios. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention too that in Android, best practices for doing any kind of text views, you're using scale pixels. So you won't ever, as long as you're following that, then you won't ever run into an issue where it will complain about dynamic text sizes or text sizes aren't, resizing correctly. So again, it's another thing that you're kind of just given, that's really nice in Android that unfortunately is not given to you that simply in iOS.
That's some frustrating things on the Apple side. Like, why is that checkbox not checked by default?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to look
I'm
into the
curious.
SwiftUI stuff. I'm curious about that too. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, so these seem like great ways to take a interface that's designed for normal use and make it more accessible. Are there sort of design guidelines from the start for making a more accessible interface?
I mean, I think that, so unfortunately, we had the approach with our project where we didn't consider accessibility to begin with, right? I mean, everything that we're showing is going to be what you want to do. It's just, again, more upfront or alongside when you're developing those features, right? It's one of those things where, I kind of hate to give it as an example. Maybe it's a personal experience for me, but something like analytics, right, seems to be also considered to be something that people end up going in and fixing, later on or at the end. But, for the most part, it's going to be making, checking your color contrast, text fonts, and stuff like that. And just that you have, I think like those are two of like the biggest ones, and that your hit areas, like your target areas for your buttons and stuff, just are the right, height and widths. Again, you can very well, depending on how custom your app is, you can end up finding some other extraneous warnings that we haven't even covered. I think as a guideline, those are, quick wins that you will hit. Again, you can always run it as you're building your app, just page by page or view by view. You can run these tools and know sooner than later, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Wonderful. Anyone else have any questions, comments?